Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the October 20th, 2022 edition of Collect Our Cousins, Engaging White People in the Struggle for Full Democracy. I'm Karen Fleshman, founder of Racy Conversations and of the Collect Our Cousins weekly live stream series. I created this series to help white people like me become more effective in the conversations we have with other white people in our lives. I'm featuring the people who inspire and teach me the most. And today I'm delighted to have Paul Ladipo on the show. White people, the struggle for our democracy will not be won in courtrooms or even on the streets. It's got to be won in our living room conversations, at PTA meetings, in our houses of worship. There are 21 million Americans, largely white, who believe that Donald Trump is a legitimate president and political violence may be necessary to restore him. We may not be able to win over those folks, but there's a lot of people who are neutral or leaning to our side who we can win over by having effective conversations with them. And that's why I'm so excited to have Paul Ladipo on the show today. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Well, thank you for having me. So,
Oh, my pleasure, my honor. Yes, I love your LinkedIn posts.
thank you so much. Yeah, I have fun writing them, so they're always a joy to write. So, I guess should I just start introduce myself and just
Yeah,
kind of
introduce yourself.
yeah, I'm Paul Ladipo, and so I reside in the Twin Cities, and so I have about 10 years of experience at DEI work, and I recently started my own consulting gig, and I use LinkedIn as a platform and a way to connect with people, and so I'm a content creator slash consultant and consultant, and so that's what I do. It's my purpose, my calling. So.
Awesome. And if you're not following Paul on LinkedIn, I highly, highly recommend just really clear, beautiful graphics, but just really great anti-racism education on your posts. Thank you so much, Paul, for your work.
It's my pleasure.
Yes. And I also popped in there. So, for those of you who don't know, I am running for the San Francisco Board of Education and the November 8th election. Please, please, if you're watching this, donate to my campaign. I need whatever you can give is going to help me reach more voters. I also put my candidate statement video in there. Share that with people in San Francisco and tell them why you support my candidacy. We really, I mean, our school district, only 60% of our graduates are college or career ready in a city that people move to from all over the country and all over the world for limitless career opportunities. So we need someone on the Board of Education who is going to fight hard for equity for our Black, Latinx, Native and Pacific Islander and immigrant students, and I am that person. And I have two folks who are also running, Alita Fisher and Gabriela Lopez. I highly recommend voting for all three of us. But let's not dive into that topic. I just had to put that in because it's top of mind. But Paul, you had a post recently on unpacking white privilege, and perhaps we should start there.
Sure. Well, we don't need to pull up posts. Why don't we just start talking about the post that I made? So I guess so I do anti-racist work, and so in anti-racist work and conversations, a lot of times the term white privilege comes up, and anti-racism is already a polarizing, emotionally charged topic. But then when you throw white privilege in there, it becomes like even more volatile. In fact, there were studies that came out from I remember a colleague of mine. According to her, that even using the term will cause some white people to not buy into it. So if you change the term white privilege or just get rid of it altogether, you get more buy-in. And that did not sit well with me. And so I made a post about it because I feel like calling it what it is how to fix a problem. I mean, we can change the terminology, but it doesn't change the fact that there's an imbalance of power. And so I made a post about white privilege because a lot of people, when they hear that, be it white or racially marginalized, they think, oh, does it mean white people don't face adversity? And so does it mean that white people don't work hard? I mean, the defensiveness really goes up, and it's amazing watching those defense mechanisms. And so I kind of said, okay, look, when I made a post, I'm like, look, let's talk about what white privilege isn't. So let's do that. So white privilege isn't or does not mean that they don't face adversity, because they do. I mean, white people are people, and so people lose spouses and significant others and have diseases and get laid off. Of course, we all face adversity. That's a human trait. It doesn't mean white people haven't worked for the things they have. I mean, some of the hardest people I know are white. Some of the hardest working people I know are white. And so, yes, white people do work hard. Doesn't mean white people are rich, because they aren't. There are lots of white people who are not rich. And so it also
In
doesn't
fact,
mean
the majority of people who are not rich are white.
yeah. And so just by sheer numbers. And so, but it also doesn't mean that white people should feel bad for being white. And that's the point I really try to emphasize, because it shouldn't, because um, I on one post, what motivated me to even make a post was one post talked about white privilege, and this guy got really defensive. He's like, "You're gonna shame white people and make all these assumptions and guilt white people," and she wasn't doing that. She wasn't guilting white
Right?
people.
Did I tell my parents, please make me a white person?
No,
No, I
no,
had no bearing on what my race or ethnicity is.
no,
I
no
am not
one does.
responsible for that.
No one does. I mean, like me asking you to apologize for being white would be like you or me or somebody asking Steph Curry to apologize for being 6'3". I mean, like, what control does he have over being 6'3"? Or what control does he have over being biracial? It's like,
Yes.
or assigned male at birth. It's like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever. But people get in their heads like, oh, I'm not gonna apologize for being white. We're like, well, I'm not asking you to.
Right.
And so when I get into privilege, what I say is that privilege means what do you have the luxury of not worrying about? Like
Mm.
for me, as a man, I have the
Mhm.
luxury of not worrying about things that women have to worry about. Like coming up, I remember my mother was like, "Okay, so if you're out of place at night, have your key ready and use the longest key and jam it right in the eye. If somebody comes and snatches you, and and not answering certain calls, not having an automated voicemail, and certain not responding, not taking certain LinkedIn or social media requests. Like I've heard a number of women say that, like, if you're a stranger, they won't respond, or if you DM them, they won't respond, or they have very specific requirements of what they accept in terms of DM. And it's like a lot of times you don't realize that is that, okay, being a guy, there's certain things I don't have to worry about. Like I don't have to worry
Mhm.
if I'm out at night. I mean, yeah, I care, but like it's a different ball game than being a woman and
Mhm.
having somebody pray up on you, or needing pepper spray, or need to have that key ready to jam into somebody's eye, or some sort of knuckle, whatever, because sexual assault is so high, unbelievably high, that women experience. And so, and
Okay,
uterus.
I do wanna clarify, though,
Sure.
that the majority of sexual assault does not happen from a stranger. The
Yes.
majority of
Right.
sexual assault happens in a Brett Kavanaugh situation. It
Yeah.
is
Yes.
my
Yes.
sexual assault, okay?
Oh my
So,
gosh.
don't
Yeah.
wanna fall into
Yeah. Yeah.
any
Yeah. Thanks for calling me on
stereotypes or assumptions about, because that's how we
Yeah.
become more vulnerable to sexual assault, because we're led to believe, "Oh, be fearful of this stranger," typically a Black stranger,
Hmm.
when in fact we are much more likely to be harmed by someone we know and of the same race
Hmm.
as we. Anyway, sorry.
No, 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 no problem. So I tell people, like, okay, when it's white privilege, again, doesn't mean that you haven't faced adversity. Doesn't mean that you're rich. Doesn't mean that life's been a cakewalk. It means that what do you have the luxury of not worrying about? And so for white people, I say things like, okay, when you shop around a store, do you have to worry about being followed? For the most part, I mean, yes, white people are. I work at retail. There are thieves of all races and colors, but the people that are followed around, almost always, good 80% of them are people of color, especially Black. That get followed around. Do you have to worry about if you get hired? Will you be called an affirmative action hire? Will people call your qualifications into question? And a lot of times in either academia or where else, if somebody is, oh, so and so is the first professor, or so and so is the first CEO, or the first governor of whatever, people wonder, oh, was this affirmative action? Were they hired because of their skin color? Or instead of asking, maybe they're hired because they happen to be a person of color that is qualified, and so
Yes.
things like that.
First,
Um,
white people make it extremely difficult for people of color to succeed. Then, when people of color do succeed, they say, "Oh, it's because of affirmative action."
yeah, it's so often on LinkedIn with somebody. What I love about LinkedIn, excuse me, is that people will announce so and so being the first CEO or the first whatever company, and or the first Black whatever, and it never fails that somebody's like, oh well, skin color isn't qualifications, and and bring up MLK and misquoting MLK, like, oh, content over character. And I'm like, oh my gosh, people, it's like, yes. they're racially marginalized, but they weren't hired just because they're racially marginalized. They were hired because they were a racially marginalized person that happened to be qualified. So you can check off two boxes. I don't believe in checking off one box like, oh, let's just hire a black person for the sake of it. No, this black person was qualified. They were the best candidate. Fine, take them on. And so, but that the pay gap. People keep talking about the pay gap. I know Cafe has the "Pay Me Like a White Man" T-shirt. That's funny. And so people get upset whenever he makes a post about that. But it's like there's a reason why that T-shirt exists is because there's a pay gap, and not enough people want to see that. They don't want to know that, but there is.
And beyond their pay gap, there's the wealth gap.
Yes, the wealth gap.
The
So yeah,
intergenerational wealth gap that now median Black net wealth is projected to be 0. It is not going up, it is going down.
Right. Yeah, and so like I said, not all white people are rich, but there's a difference in wealth gap, difference in income. And so if you just look at two people in the same field, like a lot of people like to throw curveballs, like, oh, look at LeBron James and Rihanna and Michael Jordan, they're billionaires. Like, well, yeah, they are billionaires, but of all the billionaires out there, what percentage are black? And so we come back to the same point. They keep trying to throw me the same curveballs, and it's like
the Chris Rock routine where he says to live in my neighborhood.
Oh yeah.
Host the Oscars, and my neighbor had to be a dentist.
Oh yeah, I love that one. Yeah, he's like, yeah, he had all these black celebrities on his block, and when the white guy is the dentist, nobody famous, and so, but yeah, just the pay gap, and the privilege also means that what are the odds that you'll see someone look like you? And so, like, if you in politics or religion or academia or executive leadership, chances are you're going to see somebody that looks like you versus me, and so, and one post I talked about, okay, well, who makes the laws? Who passes the laws when
look
history
at
racism?
the U.S. Senate.
Yes,
look at a picture of the U.S. Senate.
Right. So look at all the presidents, all the governors, all the senators, all the whatever. Vast majority of them are white and are still white. And so
I used to raise money, for nonprofit organizations. So I had a lot of meetings at the Yale Club in New York City. In the Yale Club, there's this big room lined with the oil paintings of all of the US presidents who are graduates of Yale. And then underneath those portraits, there are, all these very comfy, cozy chairs, and it's full of like old white men cutting deals with each other. Like, literally, it is like, wow.
It's it's an old boys club,
Yes.
It's yeah. So just the sheer, so yeah. So like I know when the history of racism, like back in 2021, when that scare came out, like who was trying to get laws passed and who was in a position to pass laws to stop that. And so you can say that a lot of people got defensive when we talk about white privilege and whatnot, but it's like, well, you're the ones that are passing laws trying to restrict the discussion in the classrooms. And so you're mad about white privilege, but you're proving the fact that it exists because you have the power to either lobby for those laws or pass those laws or veto them, And so it's like, that's such a perfect like encapsulation of white privilege. So
yes. So let's flip it around a little bit and talk about what is the benefit of recognizing white privilege, right? Why should, as a white person, what do we stand to gain? Not to be totally transactional, but what do we stand to gain by recognizing our white privilege? And I'll speak from my own experience, um I grew up in an almost entirely white community. My parents taught me racism is terrible. Dr. Martin Luther King is wonderful. The way to not be racist is to be colorblind and treat everybody the same.
Right.
I never saw them do that, which was not intentional on their part. But literally, when you live in an all white community, in a white family, you don't see your family interact across difference. So it's only as an adult that I realized, oh, well, the reason why it was an all white community was because it was a sundown town. There was a billboard on the outskirt of our town for decades saying, "Welcome to Loveland, Colorado." And underneath it was a hand painted sign that said, "We practice Jim Crow laws here."
Oh, yeah.
So who's going to be, after they took that sign down because of the federal Housing Discrimination Act, who's going to be the first family to be like, that seems like a really friendly place to live. I want to live there,
Right, right.
So, and then, I start to hear about this concept of white privilege. And I think, like many white people, I was like, okay, wait a second. I worked at Wendy's from the time I was 15 when I was making 2.85 an hour at a time when minimum wage was 3.35 an hour.
Mhm.
And when I left when I was 18, I was making 3.15 an hour. So what do you mean about my white privilege? But
Ah.
but now I realize, okay, it's because my great grandfather came over here and got 160 acres of land through the Homestead Act.
Mhm.
That's how my mom became a college graduate, became a homeowner. How I became a college graduate, became a homeowner. Like, there was no way I was going to be stuck forever making 3.15 an hour at Wendy's, even though I was there for a little bit because of that land grant to my great grandfather that he qualified for because he was a white Protestant male immigrant.
Mhm.
But had I not done all that research, I would be like, oh, well, my mom got into college because she was a good student and she worked hard. And I got into college because I was a good student and I worked hard, which is not false. And there was something underlying it too.
Mhm. Um, so yeah, I think with people with white people that are either middle class or working class or immigrant, it's like, yeah, you're saying I'm lazy, or like where I ate mayonnaise sandwiches every day coming up, and it's like, okay, so going back to the privilege definition of privilege, it doesn't necessarily mean financial privilege. They're not the same. There's a lot of overlap, but they're not the same. And so think about how society regards you. So basically, the whole idea of the whole bootstrap idea, a theory, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, very American, very red-blooded American. It works if there are no biases, if there is no racism, if there is no sexism, if there is no ableism, then yes, by all means, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, eat those mayonnaise sandwiches every day until you get rich or until you get comfortable or whatever. But the fact that the ugly truth is there are biases everywhere. So whether it's academia, retail, business, whatever, hiring managers have their biases like everyone else, and so then they make unfair selections based on race, class, gender, ability status, sexual orientation, religion, and so the bootstrap theory doesn't work because it assumes no one has biases, which they overwhelmingly do.
Yes. I read somewhere a study that within the first 5 seconds of a
Mm.
candidate speaking, the interviewer already makes judgments about their class and education status.
They do. Yeah, if we can even look at, if we could actually just talk about education, because it's like, if I all things being equal, let's say there's a clone of me. There's Paul and there's whatever clone, and so we both had the same race, same gender, same whatever. One has a degree from Harvard, one has a degree from University of Phoenix. How are they going to be judged? And I'm not here to take away or ask anybody's education where they got it from, but if I were to say, oh, I have this my master's at Harvard, how are people going to look at me? How's the interviewer going to look at me? Let's say I have a degree from Harvard. So and you judge on that based on education, based on race, based on ability status, even the color of your shirt. Like if I wear a shirt that's really hideous, and the interviewer's like, oh, it hurts my eyes. I mean, they're going to make a judgment whether it's fair or not. So
100%, 100%. We have a LinkedIn user saying, it pains me to think that they don't understand they don't face systemic adversity because of their skin color. Yes. I think this is the great lie of whiteness, right? When you go back into history, um, that the elite white people created this notion of white superiority
mhm.
so that they could engage the landless white people in upholding white supremacy, because the only way they could maintain this system is if all white people were unified in land theft, genocide,
Yeah,
and slavery. If all white people did not uphold that,
they would lose.
they
They would
would
lose.
lose. Yes, and
Yeah.
that's why any white people who were opposed to it, they came for them. They came,
Mhm.
they would execute them,
Yeah.
just destroy them.
Even today, even online, like I see white allies that speak up and they get gaslit. Gosh, they get gaslit out of existence. They get all the hate mail or hate emails and all the comments. And I read those comments. I'm like, my gosh, this is why more white people don't speak up. Is because when white people do speak up, other white people are there to, I guess,
To
in their own way,
police
collect their,
them.
let's
Yeah.
like stop this, and so it's just, yeah, it's unbelievable, when
I have
people.
learned quite a few vocabulary words that I had no idea
Yeah,
even existed. And a lot of people assume based on my name that I'm Jewish. So I also get subjected to tremendous anti-Semitism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Which anti-Semitism is tied to white supremacy. I mean, whether you want
Yes.
to believe it or not. So it's not just
100%.
racism, it's anti-Semitism, it's sexism, it's homophobia, transphobia, all of that. They're all
100.
symptoms of
Yes.
white supremacy, but people don't want to hear that.
No, no.
We can make that another conversation for another day because that's
Yes.
another conversation.
I want to talk a little bit about, you made a recent post with that beautiful wheel
Yeah.
design by Sylvia Duckworth,
Hmm.
where it had in the center is power,
Hmm.
and then all these angles from it. Who's closest to power?
Hmm.
Lighter skinned people, male,
Hmm.
cisgender, able bodied,
Straight.
economically privileged, yeah,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And then there's another ring of who's sort of in the middle, and then there's the ring of who is on the periphery, the people who are furthest from
Yes.
power.
Yes, and so in fact, if you want to think of privilege, so even if you take a group that is racially marginalized, so take like Black people, and so colorism is a big problem in our community because of
Mhm,
white privilege and white supremacy, because lighter skinned people and within our community are seen as more attractive. A lot of times they're treated, not always, but in terms of beauty, in terms of promotion, in terms of what's considered acceptable, a lot of times they get passes, be it from white people or from fellow Black people, and so it's not
mhm.
fair, but it's the issue that Black people need to address. And I know that other marginalized communities have the same issue. In fact, I remember I had a friend of mine from eastern part of the world. She told me that she would, in the summertime, she would wear jackets and an umbrella because she's not want her skin to get darker. Because
Mm,
where she was from, darker skin is more frowned upon. And other people have said this all across the world. Whether you're actually Black or not, having darker skin is seen as less attractive and less desirable. So they don't tan or they'll bleach their skin or do whatever. Or
yes, skin lightening creams
yeah.
are a huge, huge industry in Asia, in Africa.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. And so just that privilege, and so if you're
Mhm,
lighter skinned, you're thought of as fairer or nicer. And in fact, I was watching one movie that was talking about racism. I actually went to the dictionary, not the dictionary definition of racism, but like just look at the terms white and Black. So even
mhm.
before there was a concept of race, the definitions of white and Black, like white being pure, being undriven, being holy, and Black as being like,
Angelic.
yes, and Black as being symbol of death. So think of the Black Death and the Black Plague, superstition around black cats. Like just go to the dictionary, predate race relations. The terms white and Black had their like definitions, like being pure, one being impure, one being whatever you want to call it. When I saw that, when I saw him flipping through the dictionary, looking at the various definitions, because both terms have like a lot of definitions, but it's like I'm like, wow, think of how that gets into people's psyche, or how that got into psyche back in the 14th or 15th century when people developed the concept of race. They probably thought, oh, he's Black, like I'm sure he's violent or impure or whatever, and so and there you go. And so it's such a cluster.
Yes, yes. We were talking before we went live about how, I developed a lot more empathy for white women when I went back and looked at the history of the witch hunt,
Mm,
which is really happens, the peak period of the witch hunt is like, 1550 to 1650. So right when they're starting the colonization and the transatlantic slave trade, and how prior to the witch hunt, there weren't real gender roles, and women held positions of power.
mm,
We brewed ale, we were midwives and healers and spiritual leaders, and people spent a lot of time in the commons collectively cultivating um, crops and tending animals and stuff like that. So then with the onset of capitalism, the landowners were like, oh no, no more commons. This is your little plot of land over here. This is your little plot over there. And oh yeah, no more gender equality. Men are superior to women. And oh yeah, any woman who speaks out against this, we're going to call her a witch, and
Oh,
we're going to do a public spectacle of violence with the entire town watching her burn at the stake, and we're going to put her kids first in line to watch her burn.
wow.
So
That is,
what is the message that gets internalized
yeah,
from that and then brought to America?
yeah.
You know, why would women even come over here? They were literally imported here to bear the white heirs and to reproduce white supremacy. And of course they're going to be like, "Oh, please take care of me and don't let me be subjected to this violence as a survival mechanism."
That just blew my mind. I mean, I guess it really shows how deeply ingrained it is for white women not to speak out, because it's like I don't want to become a victim myself, and so I'm just gonna to save myself and my family, my marriage or whatever. I'm stay complicit in this, and so it's
And it's in my economic self-interest to do so, right? So then
mhm,
my kids will be able to inherit this, and we'll be able to live our lives the way, we deserve to live it because we are white.
yeah.
I'm drawing here on the scholarship of Sylvia Federici. I highly recommend her book, The Caliban and the Witch, which is all about this subject. And I'm not bringing this up to legitimize or justify white women's behavior. I'm just saying, we still shouldn't have been, and still should not uh, uh, engage in upholding white supremacy. But I understand a little bit more about why we do, based on knowing about this history of the role of the witch hunt.
Yeah, so I mean, it explains, but it doesn't excuse, and so like that's one of my
Exactly.
favorite phrases. Something can explain, but it doesn't excuse it. So like once you explain, it's like okay, let's now we can stop the cycle here. We can break cycles. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
So, does anyone have any questions? Would you like to pose to Paul or me any questions or comments? You can pop those in the chat. Someone is saying that's not accurate. Could you perhaps uh, 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 write a little bit more, because I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say that's not accurate? Paul, what do you think? I want to actually talk a little bit about the study that you referenced earlier, and I don't have it up, but I had kind of a slightly different take on that study. So that study was looking at social media posts,
Okay.
particularly Facebook posts. And it was comparing Facebook posts that talked about racial injustice issues, two types of posts. In a post that talked about white privilege on a certain racial injustice topic,
Mhm.
and a post that had the same kind of racial injustice topic, but talked about how do we make things fair for everyone.
Uh-huh.
If a post mentioned white privilege, it caused a lot of division and acrimony.
Yeah.
um, but if the same post was talking about let's make things more fair for everyone, like the same topic, but just did not mention the words white privilege, then it did not get so divisive and acrimonious.
I
To
see.
me, that is part and parcel of how, I get very angry about Facebook. And Facebook has deliberately created an algorithm that causes us to get more divisive with each other, because that's how they make their money, from clicks, and they want to see us getting angry at each other. So to me, the takeaway from that study wasn't let's not mention white privilege. The takeaway from that study is let's make it our opening salvo to white people
Mhm.
about we want to make things more fair for everybody. And as we start to warm them up to the topic, then we can introduce the concept of white privilege while we already have them and they're not feeling defensive. That was my takeaway from that study. I know many people had a different takeaway, and I just want to hear, how
Sure.
does what I just said land on you?
Um, so for me, I don't shy away from the term. There's a way, there's a place, manner that I bring it up, but I don't shy away from the term simply because I think it's a good way. It's a weed out term. It's a good way to find out who's willing to hear the truth and know about white privilege. Because, and I say this because not to be divisive, but because um, we need to understand that to end racism, we have to end white privilege and white supremacy. So, and those three go hand in hand. And so that a lot of people don't understand is that they don't understand that racism isn't just about hating people, because a lot of people have that narrow view of racism. That racism is like, oh, I don't like so and so because of their race, or I have stereotypes. That's racism, and like, well, more or less it is. But racism is about an imbalance of power. It's about inequity. It's about unequal access to resources, unequal treatment, mass incarceration, poorly funded schools, neighborhoods. That's racism. And so those poorly funded schools, mass incarceration, unequal jail sentences, that stems from white privilege. Okay, so on average, a white person and a black person, the same economic background, they commit a crime, the same crime, there's a chance that the white person is going to get a better prison sentence than the black person. That is white privilege, and that is racism. And so I bring it up to people to realize that, okay, if we're going to move past hate and look at inequity, we need to understand that white privilege creates this inequity. Once we get rid of white privilege, once we give people the same prison sentences for equal crimes, once we fund neighborhoods appropriately, once we fund schools appropriately, once we hire people fairly, then the white privilege goes away. And so I use that as kind of like a truth teller, but also a barometer to how much do they really want to hear? What do they want to know about racism besides, I don't like X people? I'm like, well, great, you don't like them, but that's small in comparison to other things. So,
But Paul, I don't see color.
no. Well, yeah. How do you know when you're driving? How do you know what color the light turns? Then and
Yeah.
so
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. I like
I
that one.
always practice that because so many people
Yeah.
still say that on LinkedIn. Like, I don't see color. No, what's funny, they'll say that, oh, I have grandchildren that are half black, and like, if they're not half black, and I don't see color. I'm like, well, you just call them half black. So who are you fooling, me or you?
And you also mentioned that they're half black.
Yes. I'm like, well, how do you know they're half black then? What you're not tricking me. So it becomes like
Did you do their
yeah,
ancestry?
I see through it all the time, and it's like any racist on here, a DEI advocate. Every time people say, I'm like, yeah, we see through that. So
Yes, yes. Now let's talk about how white people can utilize our white privilege, right?
yeah.
Because again, it's not about being ashamed of being white. It's
Mhm.
not about you are a horrible person because you are white.
No, it is not.
It is about how are we going to use our advantages to shift power so that it is fair and equitable for everybody, to pass policies to make sure it is fair and equitable for everybody.
Well, the first answer to that is just like, because black people on average have high positions of power, whether or not people agree with you, they'll listen to you. And so, like, if a celebrity, so I think back to Britney Spears. Say what you want to about all her stuff. I know one day on Twitter she mentioned racism against black people. She talked about Black Lives Matter, not the organization, but the hashtag movement. And the vitriol she got was ridiculous. And it's like, she acknowledged, hey, there's systemic racism, there's generational trauma because of racism, and it was amazing. It was like stunning to see the responses, be it positive or negative. And like Britney Spears, she's such a popular figure that whether you like her, you hate her, or don't care about her, people are going to listen to her. That's an example of using her privilege, not only her fame, but just her privilege or whatever, and to say something, and it shook a lot of people up, and that's a perfect example. So
Yes, yes. I remember seeing Lady Gaga and Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, Bernice King, in conversation. So powerful, it's one thing. So we can use our advantages to speak up, knowing that yes, we may face some adversity for speaking up, but it is nowhere near the threat that you receive for speaking up, right?
mm-hmm.
And we can also um, educate people around us. So that's exactly why I have this show, right? To help white people become more effective in our conversations with white people in our lives. So one of my favorite framings is I used to think, then I learned, now I think.
Mm,
I used to think I didn't benefit from white privilege because I grew up, working hard, working at Wendy's and doing all this stuff. Then I realized I have so much privilege just based on the color of my skin. Like when I get pulled over by a police officer, I never fear for my life. They almost always say, "Ma'am, your tail light is burned out. You need to get that fixed." They don't even check my ID or registration 9/10 of the time. They make all these assumptions about me based on my skin color that other people don't have. And
right.
now I use my privilege to fight against police brutality and for equitable systems for everybody.
Right. And so what I love about that is that you don't, so I mentioned Britney Spears and platform, but you don't have to have a huge social media platform or be wealthy, but it could be like, let's say you're a hiring manager, you're a board member or whatever it is, member
Yes.
of an executive team, you can, and once you realize white privilege and its problems, okay, if I'm hiring somebody, what lens am I looking at them at? How am I looking at this person? Am I looking at them because of their skin color, their qualifications, both, whatever? Make equitable practices. I mean, you can be quiet and powerful. You can speak softly and carry a big stick. And so if it's hiring people equitably, racially marginalized people and women and persons with disabilities, that's the way to use your privilege. And so oh, privileges are superpowers. It's kind of cool.
Stacy Walton. Stacy Walton is my superhero. Thank you
Oh,
so much for watching. Thank you for sharing this. Yes, privileges are our superpowers. And,
yes, that's a
and
good way to put it.
also, one thing we have to be aware of is power will reward us for upholding it,
Yes, it
and
will.
power will punish us for going against it.
Yes, that is true. Because power does not teach people without power how to take the power that they have.
Exactly.
I learned
So
that a while ago. So
so we have to be but power is never really interested in sharing power with us.
no.
Power is solely interested in preserving itself. So when it's trying to lure us in and be like, "Ooh, come with me, come with me." We have to resist. We have to say, "No, thanks very much, power. I like your money. I like your luxury. I like your nice fancy food and wine."
Yeah, my gosh.
But I am not going to be lured by you because I know in the end you really don't give a hoot about me either.
No, no, they don't. And so a lot of people don't realize that. So
Me, meanwhile, if I stay with you over here, Paul, we are the majority, right? We are the majority. Here we are headed into, as my friend Garrett Buck said, the 15th most important election of his lifetime.
15 most.
But literally, if white women and voters of color came together, we make up the majority.
But the thing is, the key is to get them together because power likes to divide, and so a lot of white women they default to their white identity, whether they say it or not, and so they vote in ways that hurt racially marginalized women and racially marginalized people in general. In fact, sometimes
And
the marginalized
ourselves.
themselves, yeah, and so. I mean, how many times on Twitter have I seen that? It's like, yeah, white women vote against themselves all the time. So,
So please, please, white women, like it is absurd to me that our children have less rights than we do.
yeah,
And, and we have the power to change that. We have the power to get our Supreme Court back and to change it. So please, please do not vote your narrow economic self interest. Stand up for freedom and equality for all people.
yes.
And please donate to Karen Fleshman for school board. Paul, tell us about your work and how can people engage with you?
Sure. So if you go to my LinkedIn profile, I have my if I have my check out my services here, or let's have a conversation. Whatever you go to my profile. There's a link to my website. If you want to contact me, and so basically I do remote and in person consulting. So I'm based in the Twin Cities, but I love remote collaborations. You know, like what you and I are doing today. I can sit at home, and so basically what I like to do is I do anti-racist training or sexual assault awareness training, and some other DEI trainings for basically corporate, nonprofit, the education sector, and faith communities. And so if you're in a situation where you want to like, okay, how do you make our place more inclusive? Not only more diverse, but you want to make it inclusive, equitable, and you want justice, then then let's talk and we can have a conversation, being in person or remote. And so try to make your organization more inclusive. And so that way everybody thrives. Everybody does better when everybody does better. So
100%, 100%. And please definitely follow Paul on LinkedIn. Paul, to wind our conversation down, I have a very important question for you.
sure.
If you could wave a magic wand and get white people to either start doing something or stop doing something, what would it be
Oof,
and why?
that's a good question. I want to need a second to think about it. If I could wave a magic wand and get white people to start doing something or stop doing something, what would it be? Okay, I would have them realize, look at modern day racism, because a lot of white people will accept and acknowledge pre 1970. They
Mm,
don't want to step into the 21st century. They don't want to
mm,
accept that racism is still alive and well, and that it changed forms. What it did, it evolved. I hate you if I can say that, but like, and so get white people to realize that. In fact, I had an argument with one of my own posts, or a conversation, I should say. So this guy was like, "Yeah, I'm tired of paying for my ancestors." I'm like, "My dude, I'm not talking about 1801. I'm talking about current day." And then he goes like, "Oh, if you stop and listen carefully to what I'm saying." I'm like, "No, you stop. I'm not. I get there's racism, there's past racism. I get there's guilt over that. But if you can step into the 21st century with me, it's not just about slavery and Reconstruction and Jim Crow. It's today. Let's look at the racism today, and we can connect the dots all the way back to slavery and Jim Crow." And so you got to follow along with me here. And so a lot of white people don't want to, they'll see the post about slavery, they acknowledge slavery, but like if you lead them, you try to get them across the line, get that across that 1970 line, they stop.
mm.
They're not gonna go past 1970. They could all die when MLK died. Instead, he was assassinated. So,
Mm.
so yeah, they think it's all dried up
A
when MLK
white wait. He was, let's not use the passive turn. A white man
assassinated.
assassinated
Yes,
him.
yes, yes. And while he was alive, he was arrested 30 times. He was picketed. He was protested.
White people threw rocks
Yes,
and bottles at
yes,
him,
yes, and white people today
hit
like
him.
yes, and white people today like to sanitize him, like, oh, MLK, and like, well, yeah, he was actually really hated in his time, and so in fact, I remember my mother telling me this because she grew up in the era. She's like, yeah, white people hated MLK, and so
Yes. I
yeah, that
highly
yeah.
recommend the movie FBI MLK, about
Mhm,
how the FBI intentionally, stirred up hatred and animosity toward him.
mhm,
Yeah.
so,
Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been an incredible conversation. David says, I'm so glad to be here. I try to use my privilege to do my part to equal the playing field by teaching my friends who don't understand our privilege as best I can whenever I can. Thank you,
bam,
David.
yes,
If
yes,
I could wave a magic wand and get white people to
there
start
we go.
doing something, it would be that. Thank you so much for doing this. I
Yeah, great
appreciate
work, David
every
Buckman.
single one of you who's doing this work, and please keep it up. Join us next Thursday. So next Thursday, October 27th, my mentor, one of the most brilliant and just wise woman I've ever met, Sweetwater Nanook. She is a Tlingit native Alaskan. She comes from a long line of healers. And she is the founder of Idle No More Washington. She is going to come on and we're going to be having a conversation about beyond colonial intervention. So please join us next Thursday. Paul, I'm so grateful for you making time for us. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Joe Flack, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a little typo. Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
I really enjoyed talking with you today, Paul. You gave me a lot of
Thank you.
hope and inspiration. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Until next week.
Bye, everyone.